They called her a disgrace, packed her corsets and shame, and shipped her west like unwanted freight. Lady Annabelle Covington didn't belong in a dusty town with more gossip than grain. But scandal has a way of stripping titles, and now the fallen rose of Philadelphia finds herself buried under prairie snow and whispered judgment. That is, until she meets Elias Thorne, a mail rider turned crippled shop hand, whose limp says he's broken, but whose poetry says he's more alive than any man she's known. He hides his pain, she hides her fire, and somewhere between lost letters and late winter storms, a love begins that no one's prepared for, not even them. What would you do if love showed up limping, bruised, and completely off limits? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every word like it's a message carried cross-country on horseback. Ma tunnel, the wind, a restless spirit, carried the grit of the plains across the threshold of redemption, Nevada, a town whose name felt more like a dare than a promise. It was here, to this stark outpost smelling of dust, lye soap, and judgment, that Lady Annabelle Covington, late of Philadelphia's finest drawing rooms, found herself unceremoniously deposited. The scandal, a lurid affair whispered behind gloved hands and silk fans, had involved a married gentleman of considerable standing. Annabelle, however, knew the truth that had been so conveniently buried. She'd been a pawn, expertly maneuvered into a compromising position. Her frantic letters of explanation and pleas for rescue intercepted before they ever left the city's gilded cage. Her family, pillars of society, whose own foundations had been rocked by the tremor of her disgrace, had prescribed a harsh cure, exile. She was to be remolded, her character reformed under the austere gaze of the Reverend Miller and his equally severe wife. Their home, a clapboard structure that seemed to shrink from the vast, indifferent sky, was to be her new world. The shock of it was a physical blow. Gone were the chandeliers and hushed carpets, replaced by the flicker of oil lamps and the scrape of rough-hewn floors. The nuanced conversations of the East gave way to blunt pronouncements and the suffocating weight of unspoken condemnation. Every bonneted woman who passed her on the boardwalk, every suspendered man who tipped his hat with a little too much scrutiny, seemed to carry the same label for her: fallen woman. Spoiled society, miss. The air was thin and cold, just like the welcome. Annabelle, who once commanded rooms with a tilt of her chin, now found herself struggling for breath, for a sense of self, amidst the relentless, silent indictment. She was an exotic bloom, a hothouse orchid, thrust into a patch of stubborn, unyielding sagebrush. Elias Thorne knew the language of this land. He'd ridden its contours as a Pony Express rider, his body once a testament to youthful endurance, now marked by the subtle, persistent limp, a memento from a fall that had stolen his thunder but not his quiet dignity. He'd traded the lightning-fast relays for the slower, more predictable rhythm of the stagecoach office, sorting mail, his hands, though weathered, moving with a practiced grace. He was a man of few words, his observations keen, his temperament as steady as the distant mountains. Their first meeting was as unremarkable as the dust motes dancing in the single shaft of sunlight piercing the gloom of the Redemption stage and post. Anna, her Eastern finery looking starkly out of place, had come to inquire about a parcel, a futile hope for some forgotten trinket from her past life. She saw a man behind the counter, lean and quiet, his face etched by sun and wind, a shadow of pain in the way he favored his left leg. He saw a woman wrapped in an armor of pride, her chin high, her eyes holding a coolness that mirrored the February chill clinging to the town. "A package for Miss Covington," she'd stated, her voice carefully modulated. Betraying none of the tremor she felt, Elias consulted his ledger, his gaze briefly flicking up to hers. "Nothing under that name today." "Ma'am?" There was no judgment in his tone, merely fact. Yet, Anna felt the familiar sting. Of course, there was nothing. Why would there be? She offered a curt nod, the rustle of her skirts the loudest sound as she turned to leave. But in that fleeting moment, as their eyes met, she'd felt something shift. It wasn't warmth, not yet, but a flicker of recognition, as if his gaze, unlike the others in this town, didn't just skim her surface but peered, for an instant, into the carefully guarded fortress within. Elias, for his part, watched her go, the proud set of her shoulders, the almost brittle elegance. He'd seen that kind of desperate courage before, in men facing impossible odds. He just hadn't expected to see it in a woman who looked like she belonged on the cover of Godey's Ladies' Book. The town of Redemption wasn't just uneasy with Anna's scandalous arrival. It was the confluence of two anomalies that set teeth on edge. Elias, though a fixture for some years now, remained an outsider in his own way, respected for his reliability, but never fully embraced. He was too quiet, too self-contained, his past a closed book. Now, with Miss Covington's dramatic appearance, the town's delicate equilibrium felt disturbed. Two solitary figures, each carrying their own unspoken burdens, had somehow unsettled the collective. Adding another layer to the town's simmering pot was the Reverend Miller's deputy, a young man named Josiah Finch, with his overly smooth pronouncements of faith and eyes that lingered a moment too long, cultivated an air of devout concern. He'd made a point of offering spiritual guidance to Anna, his words dripping with a feigned sympathy that made her skin crawl. He spoke of redemption and forgiveness, yet his gaze held a proprietary, almost predatory glint. Anna, well-versed in the subtle machinations of society, recognized the scent of hypocrisy, a far more insidious threat than the open disdain of the townswomen. Days bled into weeks. Anna learned to navigate the routines of the Miller household, the endless chores, the piety that felt like a shroud. She found a strange solace in the vast, empty landscape, so different from the curated gardens of her youth. It was honest in its harshness, unlike the veiled barbs of Philadelphia. She often found herself drawn to the stagecoach office, under the pretext of checking for mail she knew would never arrive. Each visit was a small, silent battle. The townsfolk, when present, would fall into a pointed hush. Mrs. Henderson, the storekeeper's wife, would purse her lips so tightly they threatened to disappear, but Elias Thorne would simply nod, his gaze steady, sometimes offering a quiet, "Mornin', Miss Covington," or "Wind's pickin' up." One afternoon, a sudden squall blew in, the sky turning a bruised purple. Anna had been caught out, struggling with a basket of mending she was taking to the widow hemlock. The wind tore at her bonnet, threatening to send the contents of her basket scattering down Main Street. Just as a gust nearly wrenched the basket from her grasp, a firm hand closed over hers, steadying it. Elias. He'd stepped out from the doorway of the post, his limp more pronounced in his haste. "Best get inside." "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble against the rising shriek of the wind. He didn't release her hand immediately, and for a moment they stood there, the elements raging around them, a small island of shared stillness. His hand was rough, calloused, but surprisingly warm. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," she managed, her voice softer than she intended. He merely nodded, his eyes the color of worn denim, holding hers for a beat longer than necessary. Then he took the basket. "I'll see this gets to the widow's place. You best head back to the parsonage before this breaks proper." He didn't wait for a reply, just turned and headed into the teeth of the gale, the basket secure in his grip. Anna watched him, a strange ache in her chest. It was the first unsolicited act of kindness she'd received since arriving, an act untainted by pity or expectation. Later that week, while Elias was sorting through a backlog of unclaimed mail and old office supplies, his hand brushed against a loose board in the bottom of a long-discarded, broken mail dispatch box, one that had been damaged in a stage rollover years ago. Before his permanent tenure, curious, he pried it open. Tucked inside, yellowed and creased, was a letter. The ink was faded, the handwriting unfamiliar, yet compelling. He unfolded it carefully. It was addressed to a prominent judge in Philadelphia, a man known for his integrity. The letter, penned in a desperate, almost frantic hand, detailed a young woman's innocence, an elaborate trap, and pleaded for intervention before her reputation was irrevocably destroyed. It spoke of other letters, sent through official channels, that had clearly gone astray. It was signed simply, "A friend of justice," and dated months prior, from a town far to the east, clearly mailed by someone passing through. The sender, it seemed, had tried to bypass the usual routes, perhaps suspecting interference, and the subject of the letter, the young woman so grievously wronged, Annabelle Covington. Elias stared at the brittle paper, a slow understanding dawning. This wasn't just a society belle sent west to cool her heels after a dalliance. This was something uglier. He thought of her proud defiance, the vulnerability he occasionally glimpsed behind her icy composure. He'd seen her as a displaced creature, struggling to adapt. Now, he saw a woman fighting a silent, unseen war, betrayed not just by circumstance but by those she should have trusted. He remembered his own letters, years ago, after the accident that had ended his Pony Express days. Letters seeking a different kind of help, a different future. Some met with silence, others with hollow promises. He understood, in a way few others in redemption could, the sting of a plea unheard. He carefully refolded the letter and tucked it into his breast pocket. He didn't know what he would do with it, or if he would do anything at all. But it was there, a secret shared, a fragile bridge between his quiet world and the turmoil of hers. The next time Anna came to the post, Elias found himself looking at her differently. The chill was still there, but now he saw the faint shadows beneath her eyes, the subtle tension in her jaw. He saw not the eastern blossom, wilting in the harsh western sun, but a resilient stem, bent but not broken. "Afternoon, Miss Covington," he said, his usual greeting. "Mr. Thorne," she replied, her gaze, as always, sweeping the shelves behind him as if expecting a miracle. A long silence stretched, filled only by the ticking of the wall clock. Then Elias spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "The wild roses are starting to bloom up by Whisper Creek. If you ever find yourself with an afternoon free from mending." Anna stopped the slight widening of her eyes. It wasn't an invitation, not exactly. It was an observation, an offering, a sliver of warmth in the cold expanse of redemption. "Perhaps," she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips, so fleeting he almost missed it. "Perhaps I will." As she walked away, Elias felt the faint crinkle of the old letter in his pocket. The wind had shifted, carrying not just dust, but the faint, distant promise of spring, and for the first time, the name of the town, Redemption, didn't seem quite so much like a dare. That faint suggestion of wild roses, an unexpected wildflower in the barren conversation, lingered with Anna long after she'd returned to the parsonage. It was a flicker of color in her monochrome existence, a hint that perhaps not all of Redemption was as unyielding as it seemed. Yet, her world within the Miller household soon contracted further. Mrs. Miller, perhaps sensing a nascent spark of defiance, or simply wearying of her charge's quiet sorrow, found more reasons to keep Anna occupied indoors. Her movements curtailed, her days a monotonous cycle of chores and scripture readings that felt more like penance than solace. It was during one of these enforced idles, tasked with sorting a neglected pile of old almanacs and discarded ledgers in a dim corner of the parsonage's rarely used back parlor, a space that seemed to hoard shadows and the scent of decay, that Anna stumbled upon something unexpected. Tucked inside a battered, leather-bound volume of sermons, clearly misplaced from its original owner and purpose, were several loose sheets of foolscap. They weren't sermons. The handwriting was a strong, masculine script. The letters formed with a surprising delicacy. They were poems. The plains remember every hoofbeat, every whispered prayer the wind does keep, a rider's shadow, long and fleet, chasing horizons in a sun-scorched sleep. Another spoke of the silence of stars over vast, empty landscapes, of the patient earth waiting for rain. They were simple, unadorned verses, yet they resonated with a depth of feeling that caught Anna by surprise. There was a quiet wisdom in them, a melancholy understanding of solitude and the transient nature of things. She recognized the subtle rhythm, the turn of a phrase that echoed something she'd heard before, something in the cadence of Elias Thorne's rares, measured speech. Could these be his? The thought was startling. The quiet mailman, the man with the limp and the steady eyes. A poet. It was a facet she hadn't imagined, a hidden spring in an arid landscape. The word spoke of a life lived close to the bone, of beauty found in harshness, of a resilient spirit. They touched a place in her that had long felt numb. Her contrived errands to the stagecoach office took on a new dimension. The perfunctory exchange about non-existent mail now felt charged with an unspoken awareness. She found herself observing Elias more closely, the way his hands, calloused from rains and labor, handled the delicate mail, the way his gaze would sometimes drift to the distant horizon as if searching for something lost, or perhaps something yet to come. Slowly, haltingly, their conversations began to lengthen beyond mere pleasantries. It started with the weather, the arrival of the stage, the quality of the ink in the new shipment. Then, one quiet afternoon, with the office empty save for the two of them and the rhythmic tick-tock of the big wall clock, Elias spoke of his Pony Express days. He didn't romanticize it. He spoke of the grueling rides, the ever-present danger, the profound loneliness under a canopy of indifferent stars. He mentioned the accident, not with self-pity, but as a simple fact. A door closed, a horse stumbles, a man falls. Life changes its course, whether you will it or no. He also spoke of the letters, the ones that never reach their destination, returned to sender, or worse, unclaimed. Sometimes, he said, his voice softer than usual, his gaze fixed on a bundle of mail tied with twine. You can feel the hope in him, or the heartbreak. And then they just sit here, silent, like a word caught in your throat. Anna listened, truly listened. Perhaps for the first time since her arrival in Redemption, she saw past the town's dismissive label, the lame mail clerk, and glimpsed the man beneath, intelligent, observant, with a quiet dignity and a soul that understood nuances the rest of Redemption, in its stark judgment, seemed to miss. His quiet acceptance of his own changed fortunes. His empathy for the unspoken stories in the mail he handled stood in stark contrast to the rigid piety and moral superiority she encountered daily. He possessed a gentle humanism, an understanding of life's imperfections that she found herself desperately craving. Unbeknownst to Anna, Elias was acutely aware of the watchful eyes of the Millers, the tightening leash of their supervision. Yet, he found himself compelled to offer something more than just polite conversation. He began, occasionally, to leave a small, folded piece of paper on the counter when she came in, perhaps tucked beneath a newspaper he'd set aside for the parsonage. On it would be a few lines, a verse he'd composed, a thought captured. Even a clipped wing remembers the sky. One read, another, the heaviest silence is an unspoken truth. Anna would palm these small offerings, her heart quickening, a blush rising to her cheeks that she hoped he wouldn't notice. Back in the stifling confines of her room, she would unfold them, these fragile missives, and read them by the flickering lamplight. They became her treasures. Hidden beneath her pillow, whispers of understanding in a world that refused to understand her. They were a lifeline, proof that someone saw beyond the scandal, beyond the haughty facade she was forced to maintain. It wasn't long, of course, before the whispers started in town. Redemption was too small, its inhabitants too keen on the affairs of others. Glances between Anna and Elias, however brief, were noted. His slight inclination to linger when she was present, her almost imperceptible softening when she addressed him. These were fodder for the gossip mill, the fallen society lady, and that dreamer with the gimp. Mrs. Henderson was overheard saying to a customer at the mercantile, her voice sharp with disapproval, like calls to I suppose, both of 'em a bit touched. If you ask me, the words, when they inevitably reached Anna's ears via a tight-lipped remark from Mrs. Miller, stung, but they also solidified a strange, unacknowledged alliance in her mind. Elias, too, was finding ways to let his buried intellect and kindness breathe. He'd begun spending an hour or two, twice a week, at the small, struggling orphanage run by the aging Martha Jenkins on the outskirts of town. He taught the older children their letters, helped them with sums, and read to them from the few dog-eared books the orphanage possessed. Anna learned of this not from Elias. He was not one to advertise his good deeds, but from a grudging comment made by Reverend Miller himself, who, while approving of the charitable act, seemed to view it as further evidence of Elias's unsuitability for normal society. Always got his head in the clouds or in a book. That one, he'd grumbled, filling those children's heads with notions. To Anna, it was yet another layer revealed, a testament to a depth the town willfully ignored. Meanwhile, Anna found her own quiet rebellion, her own path back to a part of herself she thought lost. In the corner of the Miller's rarely used parlor stood an old, upright piano, its mahogany finish dull with dust. Several keys yellowed and silent. Mrs. Miller had declared it a vanity, best left undisturbed. But Anna, whose musical education had been a cornerstone of her upbringing, felt an irresistible pull. In stolen moments, when the house was quiet, she would slip into the parlor. At first, she just cleaned it, carefully wiping away the grime, her fingers itching to touch the keys. Then, with a borrowed tuning wrench she'd discreetly acquired, and knowledge gleaned from a dusty manual found amongst the old books, she began the painstaking process of trying to bring it back to life. Some notes were beyond her skill, but slowly, a semblance of its former voice emerged. One afternoon, a hesitant melody drifted from the parsonage, a Chopin nocturne, fragile and melancholic, but unmistakably beautiful. Elias, walking past on his way to deliver a late parcel, stopped in his tracks. He knew that music. He stood there for a long moment, hidden by the shade of a cottonwood, listening. It was like hearing a caged bird sing, a poignant reminder of a world far removed from redemption, yet a testament to the resilience of the spirit within its walls. A silent ritual began to unfold between them. Each morning, on her way to the mercantile for supplies Mrs. Miller had conveniently forgotten to procure, Anna would leave a small, fresh-baked roll, a product of her enforced kitchen duties, on the edge of the post office counter, just inside the door before Elias officially opened. Later, when she passed by again, feigning an interest in the stagecoach arrival times, the roll would be gone, and sometimes, in its place, would be a single wildflower or another small, folded note. No words were exchanged about these gifts, but they became a profound, unspoken conversation, a daily affirmation of their quiet connection. Elias always carried an old silver pocket watch, a gift from his father. It hadn't kept proper time in years, its hands frozen at 3:15. He'd meant to get it fixed, but somehow never had. It was more a memento than a timepiece. One day, Anna noticed it lying on the counter as he was busy with a customer. On an impulse, while his back was turned, she picked it up, her fingers noting the intricate engraving on the case. That evening, instead of her usual mending, she worked by candlelight with a set of tiny screwdrivers she'd found in a discarded sewing box. She knew a little about clockwork. Her own grandfather had been a keen amateur horologist. It was delicate, painstaking work. A few days later, as Elias reached for his watch, he noticed something different. The hands were moving. He held it to his ear. The faint, steady tick-tick-tick was a sound he hadn't heard in a decade. He looked up, scanning the street. Anna was just disappearing into the mercantile, her back straight, her bonnet obscuring her face. A slow smile touched Elias Thorne's lips. The world was still a harsh place, redemption still a town quick to judge. But now, amidst the dust and the silence, there were small, steady beats of hope, like the newly mended heart of his old watch. And between the halting steps of his gait and the measured cadence of her stolen moments, a silent language was being written, line by precious line. What did you think of today's story? If it made your day, drop a good in the comments. If it didn't hit the mark, just type 1. Got your own thoughts? I'd love to hear them below. And hey, don't forget to hit subscribe. It's free, and it really helps the channel grow. Thank you so much for being here. The mended pocket watch, ticking faithfully against Elias Thorne's vest, became a quiet metronome marking the passage of days, each beat a testament to the unspoken understanding that had taken root between him and Anna Covington. The silent language of shared bread and wildflowers, of poetry slipped like contraband into waiting hands, continued a fragile counterpoint to the town's unrelenting scrutiny. But the tentative warmth of these exchanges was soon challenged by a harsher, more elemental force. Winter descended upon Redemption not as a gentle blanket of snow, but as an invading army. It came with a biting wind that howled down from the peaks like a famished wolf, driving sheets of ice and snow before it, burying the landscape and severing the town's tenuous links to the outside world. The stagecoaches stopped running. Mail deliveries ceased. Redemption was on its own, an isolated island in a sea of white. The enforced confinement frayed nerves already stretched thin. Inside the parsonage, the atmosphere grew heavier. Mrs. Miller's pronouncements sharper, Reverend Miller's sermons longer and more laden with warnings of tribulation. Anna, however, found a strange resilience blooming within herself. The piano, now mostly in tune, offered solace, its melodies a defiant whisper against the wind's roar. Her quiet competence in managing household tasks, born of necessity, began to subtly chip away at the helpless society misimage, though few in the Miller household would acknowledge it. Then, one bitter afternoon, when the snow had momentarily paused its assault, a figure emerged from the gray, swirling landscape. He was not of Redemption. He rode a tired, expensive-looking horse, and his Eastern city coat, though travel-stained, spoke of wealth and a life far removed from the grit of the West. As he dismounted stiffly before the parsonage, his gaze swept the street with an air of arrogant disdain. Anna, catching a glimpse of him through the frosted parlor window, felt a chill colder than the wind claw at her spine. Her breath hitched. Reginald Blackmore, the name itself was a viper, coiling in her memory, the architect of her ruin, the man whose advances she had spurned, only to be ensnared in his vengeful, scandalous trap. He hadn't come for redemption, he'd come for retribution, or perhaps profit. His voice, when he was admitted by a wary Reverend Miller, carried the smooth, cultured tones Anna remembered, tones that now sounded like a death knell. She couldn't hear the words from the hallway, but the intent was clear in his predatory stance, the smug set of his jaw. He was here to reclaim his honor, as he'd once threatened, likely through threats, public denouncement, or by extracting a sum that would bleed her family dry and further cement her disgrace. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Anna. There was no protection for her here. The Millers, for all their piety, would likely see this as divine judgment, a further unfolding of her deserved punishment. Her mind raced. There was only one place, one person who might offer a sliver of sanctuary, Elias. Without a second thought, bundling herself in her warmest cloak and boots, she slipped out the back kitchen door while Blackmore was still engaged with the Reverend. The wind tore at her, stinging her face with ice crystals. But she pushed on, her gaze fixed on the distant, comforting shape of the stagecoach office. Elias was banking the stove when she burst in, snow swirling around her, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Anna, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost. Worse," she choked out, her teeth chattering from cold and fear. "Blackmore. Reginald Blackmore. He's here, at the parsonage." Elias's expression, usually so placid, hardened. The name clearly meant nothing to him, but the terror in Anna's eyes was unmistakable. He took her arm, his grip firm and steady, guiding her towards the warmth of the stove. "The man from Philadelphia?" he asked, his voice low. Anna nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Elias didn't waste time with questions. He looked out the window, his gaze sweeping the snow-swept street. He'll come looking for you once he realizes you've flown the coop. His eyes, usually the color of worn denim, now held the glint of hard flint. He won't find you unprepared. Despite the persistent ache in his leg, a cruel reminder of past violence, Elias moved with a grim purpose. He retrieved an old but well-oiled shotgun from beneath the counter, checking its load. From a locked chest, he pulled out a heavy Colt revolver and a box of cartridges. He began to stack firewood reserves near the stove, then moved to reinforce the door with a heavy iron bar he normally used to secure the freight shutters. Anna watched him, a sense of unreality washing over her. This quiet, thoughtful man, this poet, was transforming before her eyes into a bulwark, a defender. There's an old buffalo robe in the back, and some blankets, he instructed, his voice calm but firm. Best make yourself as warm as you can. This storm's settling in for the night, and so are we. As Anna gathered the furs, her hand brushed against a small, leather-bound journal tucked amongst Elias's few personal effects on a shelf. It was his book of poems, the one she'd glimpsed before. Hesitantly, she picked it up. Just then, another item caught her eye, tucked beneath a stack of old waybills. A letter, sealed, but addressed in Elias's hand to Judge Harrington in Philadelphia, the very same judge the friend of justice letter had been sent to. It was dated only a few weeks prior. Her heart hammered. This wasn't the letter about her that Elias had found. This was one he had written. With trembling fingers, she opened it. It was a carefully worded, impassioned plea on her behalf, detailing what he had pieced together about her situation, attesting to her character as he had observed it, and urging the judge to look past the scandal to the injustice beneath. It spoke of intercepted correspondence and powerful men protecting their own. It was a brave, selfless act, a testament to a loyalty she hadn't known she'd earned. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the ink. He had tried to help her, silently, without expectation of thanks. Elias, seeing her with the letter, simply nodded, figured it was a long shot. Storm came before the stage could take it. There was no embarrassment in his admission, only a quiet resolve. You believe me, she whispered, clutching the letter. I believe what I see. Anna, he said gently, and I've seen a good woman weathering a cruel storm. He took the letter from her, refolded it, and placed it on the counter. Right now, we've got a different kind of storm to face. The blizzard hit with renewed ferocity, a howling banshee that rattled the very timbers of the small building. Snow piled against the windows, plunging the office into a premature twilight, lit only by the flickering oil lamp and the orange glow from the stove's grate. The wind was a constant, mournful cry, amplifying the isolation, the sense of being the only two souls left in a frozen, hostile world. Anna, far from the spoiled Lady Blackmore, and perhaps even the Millers imagined, proved her mettle. She helped Elias secure the shutters, her fingers nimble despite the cold. She made coffee, strong and hot, her movements efficient in the cramped space. She was no longer just the recipient of care. She was a partner in their shared predicament. As the hours wore on, the tension became a palpable entity in the room. Every gust of wind sounded like an approaching footstep. Every creak of the building, a threat. To break the oppressive silence, Elias picked up his journal of poems. Might as well pass the time, he said, his voice a little rough. He began to read, his voice a low, steady anchor in the tumult. He read of endurance, of the quiet beauty of the plains, of stars viewed from a lonely campfire. And then he read a new one Anna hadn't seen before. Her eyes hold echoes of a distant sea, a storm-tossed vessel, seeking calmer lee. This western harbor, rough though it may be, offers a shelter, steadfast, strong, and free. He looked up, his gaze meeting hers across the small, warm space. I ain't much of a harbor, Anna, and I surely can't offer you what you're used to, but I'll not see you harmed. Not while I draw breath. It was a declaration, simple and profound, not of passion, perhaps, but of a deep, unwavering loyalty. Anna felt the tears she'd held back for so long finally spill over, tracing hot paths down her cold cheeks. Elias, she began, her voice thick with emotion. You don't know him. Blackmore. He's ruthless. He once boasted. She hesitated, a specific memory surfacing, a cruel detail she'd overheard Blackmore relate with relish at a party. Long before her own troubles began, he spoke of an incident, years ago, out west, a rival in some business venture, a man who wouldn't yield. Blackmore arranged an accident on a stage line, a regrettable incident that left the man crippled, his ambitions ruined. He even mentioned the man's name. Thorne. Elias went very still. The hand holding the journal tightened, the knuckles white. The name, his name, the pieces of his own fractured past, the unexplained malice of the accident that had nearly killed him and ended his Pony Express career, the one that left him with this constant, gnawing pain in his leg. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The man who had come to destroy Anna was the same man who had tried to destroy him. Blackmore. Elias repeated, the name a venomous hiss on his tongue. His eyes, when they met Anna's again, held a new, terrible understanding and a resolve that was chilling in its intensity. Then he has more than one debt to pay in redemption. The wind howled outside, a symphony of their shared peril. But inside the small, fortified stagecoach office, a fire burned, not just in the stove, but between two souls who had found in each other an unexpected refuge, their pasts and present suddenly, terrifyingly intertwined. They waited, together, for the inevitable confrontation, the silence now charged not just with fear, but with the grim strength of two people who had nothing left to lose, and perhaps everything to gain. The wind outside shrieked like a chorus of damned souls, a fitting overture for the evil that clawed its way through the blizzard towards them. The terrible knowledge of Blackmore's past villainy hung heavy in the air of the small stagecoach office, a shared dread that tightened Elias's jaw and brought a resolute, almost feral gleam to Anna's eyes. They didn't have long to wait. A furious pounding on the reinforced door vibrated through the floorboards, nearly drowned out by the storm's fury. Covington, I know you're in there. And you, Thorne. So, the cripple plays the white knight. Does he? Open this door, or by God, I'll burn this shack to the ground with both of you in it. Reginald Blackmore's voice, distorted by rage and the wind, was a venomous lash. Elias moved, placing himself between Anna and the door. The old shotgun held steady despite the tremor of fury that coursed through him. He's not getting in. Anna, he won't stop. Elias, he's insane with pride and malice. Anna's voice was low, urgent. Her gaze darted around the small space, cataloging every meager resource. Her mind, sharpened by months of quiet observation and a desperate will to survive, was already racing. The pounding became a splintering crack as Blackmore threw his shoulder against the wood. He was a man possessed. Elias sighted down the barrel. One more step, Blackmore, and you'll meet your maker sooner than you planned. A jeering laugh answered him. You think that piece of ancient history scares me? Thorne, I should have finished you years ago. And as for you, Annabelle, my dear, your little escapade ends tonight. You'll come with me, or I'll spread such tales about your conduct in this God-forsaken town that even these pious hypocrites will stone you in the street. I hear your pet pastor's little helper, Finch, already has his suspicions. He's a most understanding young man. The mention of Josiah Finch, that oily harbinger of false piety, sent a fresh wave of revulsion through Anna, but there was no time for that now. Blackmore was an immediate, physical threat. Another crash, and the door groaned, a hinge giving way. Elias fired, not at Blackmore directly. He was no killer, but at the doorframe beside where he judged the man's head to be. The roar of the shotgun filled the small office, the acrid smell of gunpowder sharp in their nostrils. A howl of surprise and pain from outside told them the pellets had found a mark, even if only splinters. But Blackmore was relentless. He kicked at the weakened door, and it burst inward with a screech of tortured wood, revealing him framed in the swirling snow. His face contorted in a mask of fury, a trickle of blood running from a gash on his cheek. He lunged, a heavy cudgel, likely a stout tree limb he'd wrenched free, raised high. Elias, hampered by his leg, met the rush, swinging the shotgun like a club. The impact jarred him, but Blackmore, fueled by rage, pressed his advantage. He was larger, stronger, his movements brutal. He brought the cudgel down on Elias's shoulder, forcing a pained grunt. Elias stumbled, his bad leg buckling. Seeing Elias falter, Anna knew she had to act. Her eyes fell on the glowing belly of the pot-bellied stove, a poker resting beside it, its tip nearly incandescent from the heat. Blackmore, obsessed with subduing Elias, had momentarily forgotten her. Reginald, her voice, clear and commanding, cut through the melee. He turned, surprised by her tone. In that instant of distraction, Anna seized the poker. It wasn't a weapon she could wield effectively against his brute strength. But she wasn't aiming for him. With a desperate cry, she hooked the glowing tip into the open weave of the heavies, oilskin-treated duster he wore, a garment designed to repel weather, but now terrifyingly flammable. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a sickening whoosh, the fabric ignited. Flames licked up Blackmore's chest. He screamed, a high, terrified sound, dropping his cudgel, beating at his burning coat. The acrid smell of scorched wool and something else, fear, filled the air. The snow? You fool! Get out in the snow! Anna shrieked, stepping back as he flailed. Blinded by pain and panic, Blackmore staggered backward, crashing through the ruined doorway and into the blizzard. A grotesque, flaming torch against the white fury of the storm. He collapsed into a snowdrift, rolling, screaming. The flames slowly, agonizingly extinguished by the smothering snow. Then, with a final curse, he scrambled to his feet and plunged into the darkness, a wounded animal seeking escape. The immediate threat was gone, but the office was a wreck, and Elias was down. He lay crumpled near the overturned mail counter, his face pale, a dark stain spreading rapidly on his trouser leg. High on his thigh where the old wound had clearly been savagely reopened or a new one inflicted, Elias, Anna flew to his side, her own fear forgotten, replaced by a desperate urgency. She knelt in the debris, her hands hovering over the wound. Blood. So much blood. "Anna!" He gasped, his eyes clouded with pain. He gone. Yes, he's gone. Don't talk. We need to stop this bleeding. Her voice trembled, but her hands, when she pressed a wad of relatively clean sacking against the wound, were surprisingly steady. She remembered snippets of battlefield first aid her grandfather had described, tales of her great-aunt who had been a nurse. Pressure, elevation. If possible, she tore strips from her own petticoat, her fine Philadelphia linen sacrificed without a thought. Fashioning a tight compress, Elias groaned as she tightened it, his skin clammy beneath her touch. "Stay with me. Elias," she pleaded, her face close to his. "Please, stay with me." His eyelids fluttered. His breathing was shallow, desperate. She searched for anything to anchor him, to keep his fading consciousness tethered to her. His poems. She reached for the small, leather-bound journal that had fallen nearby. Her voice, raw with emotion, filled the small, ravaged space, a fragile shield against the howl of the wind and the encroaching shadows of unconsciousness. "The plains remember every hoofbeat," she began, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Every whispered prayer the wind does keep." She read on, her voice gaining strength, pouring all her fear, her hope, her burgeoning love into the simple, profound words he had written. She read of resilience, of quiet dignity, of the vast, enduring beauty of the land he loved. She read to keep him alive, to keep herself from succumbing to despair. Through the long, terrifying night, as the blizzard raged unabated, Anna fought for Elias Thorne's life. She melted snow for water, coaxed him to take sips. She kept the fire stoked. The small office, a fragile haven against the elemental fury outside. She cleaned the wound as best she could, her stomach churning, her hands stained with his blood. She found a small tin of salve, meant for saddle sores and minor cuts, and applied it, praying it would do some good. She had no medicines, no herbs she recognized as healing in this harsh land. All she had was her will and the echo of his words. Just before dawn, as the storm began to show the first signs of abating, there was a faint scratching at what remained of the door. Anna froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Blackmore, but the voice that called out was small, frightened. "Mr. Thorne, Mr. Thorne, are you in there? It's Billy. Billy Holcomb, Billy, the eldest of the orphans Elias taught, a scrawny lad of 10 with eyes too old for his years. He'd been worried. He later explained, when Mr. Thorne hadn't come by the orphanage before the worst of the storm hit. Wrapped in a threadbare blanket, he'd fought his way through the blizzard's dying gasps. Drawn by a flicker of light and a sense of unease, he peered in, his eyes wide with horror at the sight of the ransacked office and Elias, pale as death, with Anna kneeling beside him. The boy had seen the end of Blackmore's retreat, a flailing, cursing figure vanishing into the storm hours earlier. He hadn't understood it then, but now, Anna, exhausted but resolute, sent young Billy, despite his terror, to the parsonage, not for the Millers. She knew no help would come from there, but for Doc Miller, the Reverend's estranged brother, a man of medicine who lived a recluse's life on the edge of town, his skills largely shunned due to his cantankerous nature and fondness for drink. but respected nonetheless. It was a desperate gamble. As Billy scurried off, a small, brave messenger in a vast, indifferent world, Anna turned back to Elias. His breathing was a little stronger. His eyes flickered open, focusing on her face with effort. "Anna," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You stayed?" "Of course, I stayed," she said. Her voice choked. She smoothed his hair back from his damp forehead. "I'll always stay." A faint smile touched his lips. The fire in the stove crackled. A small, defiant sound. Outside, the wind was finally sighing itself to sleep. The battle for the night was over. The battle for Elias Thorne's life, and perhaps for their future in redemption, had just begun. News of the night's events, carried on the wings of rumor and young Billy's wide-eyed testimony, would soon spread through the thawing town, and redemption would be forced to choose its sides. Some, she knew, would condemn, but others, perhaps, would see the courage of a fallen lady and a lame mailman, and find in their story a different kind of poetry. The first pale light of a storm-scoured dawn brought with it not just the end of the blizzard, but the gruff, reluctant arrival of Doc Miller. Young Billy Holcomb, bless his brave heart, had succeeded in rousing the town's curmudgeonly physician. Doc Miller, smelling faintly of whiskey and disapproval for all mankind, nonetheless knew his trade. He stitched and bandaged Elias's leg with practiced, if rough, hands, muttering about fools who got themselves into such predicaments, and women who clearly had more spirit than sense to stay with them. Anna, weary to her bones but unyielding, assisted him, her earlier ministrations earning a grudging nod from the doctor, kept him from bleeding out. Girl, more than most fine ladies would have the stomach for. Elias hovered between worlds for days, feverish and weak, but Anna was his constant shadow. She coaxed broth between his lips, bathed his brow, and spoke to him in low, soothing tones, sometimes reading his own poems back to him, their familiar cadence a balm to his restless spirit. The townsfolk, venturing out as the snowdrifts slowly yielded to a reluctant thaw, kept their distance, though whispers and furtive glances followed young Billy's dramatical, if somewhat embellished, accounts of the siege at the stagecoach office, the story of the burning man fleeing into the storm, of Miss Covington's fierce defense, and Mr. Thorne's bravery began to take on the sheen of local legend, albeit a controversial one. Josiah Finch, the deputy pastor, was quick to cast aspersions, his voice dripping with sanctimonious concern about compromised situations and unseemly influences. But even his pronouncements were met with a new uncertainty by some. As the passes cleared and the world reasserted its connections to redemption, two stern-faced men in city clothes arrived on the first available stage. They were emissaries from the Covington family, dispatched with the singular purpose of retrieving their errant daughter and salvaging what remained of the family name, likely through an arranged, advantageous, and entirely loveless marriage. They found Anna not in the parsonage, but at Elias's side in the slowly recovering stagecoach office, her fine dress smudged with dust and healing salves, her hands capable and gentle as she changed his dressings. Annabelle, the older man, a lawyer named Pendergast, began, his voice devoid of warmth. "Your family has endured enough. You will pack your things. Arrangements have been made." Anna looked up from where she was carefully propping Elias's healing leg on a pillow. Her gaze was clear, unwavering. "Arrangements," she repeated, a cool irony in her tone. "You mean transactions. I am not a commodity. Mr. Pendergast, this is not a request. Annabelle, the second man, a dour cousin, interjected. Your behavior has been beyond the pales. This liaison. He gestured disdainfully at the humble office and the recuperating Elias. Is the final indignity. Elias, pale but lucid, made to speak, but Anna laid a gentle hand on his arm. She rose, her slight frame imbued with a dignity that far outshone their stiff formality. Gentlemen, she said, her voice quiet but resonant with an unshakable resolve. I have spent a lifetime in gilded cages, seeking permission to draw breath, to have a thought, to feel an emotion without it being scrutinized, judged, or bartered. I will not return to that. My place is here, here. Pendergast scoffed. With him, in this hovel, have you lost your senses? On the contrary, Anna replied, a faint smile touching her lips. I believe I have finally found them. Tell my family I wish them well. But my life is my own now. And with that, she turned her back on them, effectively dismissing them and the suffocating world they represented. The men, after a few more blustered threats and pronouncements of her inevitable ruin, eventually departed, leaving behind only the faint scent of disapproval and expensive wool. In the weeks that followed, as Elias slowly regained his strength, he and Anna began the work of rebuilding more than just the damaged stagecoach office. With lumber salvaged and bartered, and with Anna's surprisingly practical suggestions, the office was not merely repaired, but transformed. New shelves were built, the walls whitewashed, bright calico curtains sewn by Anna's own hand graced the windows. It became a welcoming space, warm and clean, a true haven for weary travelers. Elias, with Anna's encouragement, started a small lending library with his own few books and some donated by Doc Miller, who, it turned out, had a soft spot for literature and lost causes. An hour each afternoon was set aside for any of Redemption's children who wished to learn their letters. Elias's quiet patience making him a surprisingly effective teacher. The town watched, at first with suspicion, then with a grudging curiosity that slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to morph into something akin to respect. They saw Anna, no longer the aloof, fallen lady, but a woman of quiet industry, mending sex, tending a small herb garden behind the office, her laughter sometimes mingling with Elias's softer tones. They saw Elias, his limp more pronounced but his spirit undimmed, serving them with his customary courtesy, his eyes now holding a warmth that had been absent before. One crisp spring evening, as the scent of new lilacs drifted on the breeze, Elias, with a nudge from Anna and the surprising encouragement of the local newspaper editor, who had a fondness for local color and a nose for a good story, agreed to a public reading of his poetry at the newly refurbished stage office. The place was packed. Reverend Miller and his wife were conspicuously absent, as was Josiah Finch, but many others came. Storekeepers, ranchers, even a few of the more stern-faced matrons, their curiosity outweighing their disapproval. Elias stood, a little unsteady, but resolute, Anna a quiet presence by his side. He read of the land, of solitude, of the quiet courage of ordinary lives, and then, his voice deepening with emotion, he read a poem simply titled Annabelle. It spoke not of scandal, but of resilience, of a spirit that refused to be broken, of an eastern bloom taking root in harsh western soil and, against all odds, thriving, She came amidst the whispers and the frost, a fragile grace, it seemed, her bearings lost, but in her heart a courage uncrossed, found warmth in ashes, reckoned not the cost. Her hands, once schooled to silk and ivory key, now soothe the hurt, and work to set me free. No storm can prove what love has shown to me, a steadfast light for all the world to see. A profound silence filled the room when he finished, broken only by a few discreet sniffles. It was as if the town collectively held its breath, re-evaluating, seeing not just the scandal, but the humanity, the quiet love story that had unfolded in their midst. The editor, a man named Silas Croft, a lover of words himself, published the poem in the next edition of the Redemption Record. It caused quite a stir. Not long after, a letter arrived for Elias, bearing an Eastern postmark. It was from Judge Harrington in Philadelphia. The Friend of Justice letter, which Elias had eventually forwarded after the blizzard, along with his own testimony and a quiet word from Doc Miller, who, it turned out, had some surprising connections back east, had finally borne fruit. An inquiry had been made. Reginald Blackmore, already facing scrutiny for some dubious financial dealings, found his carefully constructed reputation crumbling. Anna's name was quietly cleared in circles where such things mattered, though for Anna herself, that distant vindication was a pale echo of the peace she had found in redemption. Some of the more reputable Eastern literary journals even reprinted Annabelle, a curious missive from the Wild West, the old upright piano from the parsonage, which Reverend Miller had been all too eager to be rid of a distraction from proper worship, found a new home in a corner of the expanded stage office. Elias, with painstaking care and surprising mechanical aptitude, had fully restored it, tuning each string, polishing the wood until it gleamed. And so, the story found its gentle cadence on many a spring evening, as the last rays of the sun painted the prairie sky in hues of rose and violet. The sound of Anna playing Chopin or a lively folk tune would drift from the stagecoach office, a beacon of warmth and culture. Elias would sit nearby, a journal open on his lap, penning new lines, his gaze often resting on Anna, a quiet smile playing on his lips. The stagecoach office, once merely a functional outpost, had become the heart of a small, burgeoning community spirit, a place of learning, music, and shared stories. One afternoon, a letter arrived that was different from the usual mail. It was an invitation, penned by a territorial governor, addressed to both Mr. Elias Thorne and Miss Annabelle Covington. It spoke of a new settlement further west, on the very edge of the frontier, in desperate need of a school, of people with vision and heart to help build a community from scratch. They were invited to come, to teach, to lead. Anna read it aloud, her voice soft. Elias listened, his eyes thoughtful. They looked at each other, a silent question passing between them. Redemption had, in its own flawed way, offered them a haven, a place to heal and to find each other. But the West was vast, and the future unwritten. That evening, as Anna played a gentle nocturne, and Elias watched the first stars prick the darkening sky, the invitation lay on the table between them. No decision was voiced, no immediate plans made. There was only the music, the soft scratch of Elias's pen, the peaceful rhythm of two lives intertwined, facing a new horizon. Together, the storms had passed, not proving love, but revealing it, refining it, until it shone, clear and true, under the vast, starlit expanse of the American West, housed What did you think of their story so far? Was Annabelle just a spoiled runaway, or a woman finally choosing her own trail? And Elias, is he a broken man, or the only one strong enough to carry a love like this? I'd sure love to know what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read everyone, like it's a letter addressed straight to me. And if this kind of storytelling speaks to you, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next tale of grit, grace, and forbidden love out on the frontier.